So with this pattern, there's a digital download for a set of instructions, as well as the pattern pieces. Make sure you've just read through everything before you start cutting your expensive fabrics, and then you're ready to hop into step number 1, and that's where I'm going next. To get the right size of the back panel pattern, put on a pair of pants with a belt, and find where it sits most comfortably at the back of your spine. Tilt your head forward and feel for the first bump. Now standing straight up, use a tape measure and measure from your belt up to that spiny bump. Notate that measurement. For me, it's 21 inches. With that measurement, subtract 3 inches. On the back panel pattern, measure up from the belt line to that measurement. That should be the location of the seam line between back and crown. If you have to move that seam line up, then add to back but subtract from crown. If you need to move that seam line down, add to crown but subtract from back. When you've located that seam line, add some seam allowance, and then carry the paper patterns to the fabric and cut out your panels. On the prototype pack, the bottom panel rolled directly into the front lower, and it had a curved seam with the front. I also had the sides joined directly to the front. Following the pattern, the geometries are a little bit different. The front lower still connects to the front, but I've added these mirrored side trims that sit between the front panel and where your side pockets will be. The center front webbing will be 3/4 of an inch with a single quick release connecting to the lid. For the side trim webbing, I'll be using this 3/8 inch nylon webbing, which gives me attachment points for compression straps and things like that. This is the first step where we will be sewing. So first thing first, I got a brand new needle in the machine. And for thread, I'll be using most likely TERA 60. If you don't have the TERA threads, another great option is Gütermann MARA, or even just the all-purpose that you can buy at Joann's. That's equivalent to MARA 100. So in this step, it calls for doing a French seam. The reason why is the side webbing uses the seam allowance as reinforcement. So you won't be able to go back and bind the inside edges of that seam. So if you don't know how to do that, it's really easy. The only thing that's kind of weird about it is you want to start with the wrong sides of the fabric facing. So I'm going to be showing you on this little bit of Tyvek. Wrong sides will be the ones with the blue. So we'll have that facing, right sides are out, and we're going to sew just an 1/8 inch seam right on the outside. Okay, so then you're going to open it up and fold it back over on itself. Now right sides are out, and then you'll go to your 3/8 inch seam allowance, which will allow you to cap the raw edges inside that seam. And there, when you fold it right sides out, when the pack is done, you flip the bag right side out. You can see that the seam is normal on the outside. On the inside, you have a nice finished seam, and you won't have to bind this edge. So we have our front panel and our 2 side trims, and you notice on the pattern that I've given a very generous seam allowance for the connection between the front and the side trim for this French seam, so you should really have no problem getting this tucked in correctly. If you notice, I like to draw my seam lines on the fabric, and that way it not only tells me where I should just place the needle and I don't have to worry so much about the seam guides, but it also shows me the start and finish points to where I don't encroach on the seam allowance for other panels. Okay, so there we go. We got our 2 French seams done. When we open it up, you see we've got a lot of a finished seam on the inside, and that gives us more than enough material that we'll be able to use as reinforcement for that side webbing. We'll be attaching front lower to front, so just make sure that you have the right side correct. The pattern, I mark which side goes to the front side, to the front panel. Now you just got to make sure that your center marks are aligned, and then you can stitch those together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So you can see that's a curved seam, and I just followed it around on both sides, matching on both sides. And I continued over onto the side trims. And what that'll do is that'll give you some volume in the front. To sew our side webbing on, I like to just tape it in place and then use kind of what's called a story stick, where it's a piece of tape that I've marked all my stitches on, where I'm going to tack the webbing to the underside. So remember, you want to press that French seam towards the trim and finger press this the best you can. If you're using these stiff materials, it's hard to get a good seam. And I like to align the webbing right to the edge of that seam, or just over it to where you don't necessarily see the seam underneath the webbing. At the bottom, I make a little loop in my webbing to where it doesn't come into this area of the front lower. So it'll just have a loop at the bottom and tacked, and that's another attachment point for something, or it's just a nice finish. Okay, so we've got our two side webbings on. Now I'm going to do the middle, and it's important to, again, do your story stick. I use the same tape as I did for the sides, and I'm going to come up to about the middle of the bag here, and that way all of this excess is what I can use to tension the top lid with. Now down here, you want to make sure you give yourself some slack in the webbing for your ice axe pick. Here's prototype pack. Right, so I've got 1/2 inch or so of excess, maybe a little bit less than 1/2 inch of excess there. One of the nice things about doing these loose is it won't cause your panel to pucker too much. Okay, so since the webbing here would just be sewn directly into one layer of fabric, I actually am going to use a backer just for a little bit of reinforcement, and this is just a piece of scrap. You can really use whatever you want, just give yourself a little bit of a reinforcement. And then the back, you can see I got through the reinforcement, and again, I'll trim this off. I use a hot knife to cut this so it doesn't fray. If yours frays, then use ribbon. Grosgrain ribbon would work great here. On the prototype, the side pocket was made with the body fabric and a stretchy kind of insert that allows me to add a piece of elastic inside the hem to where this pocket stretches. The downside of the prototype, which I fixed in the pattern, is that this body piece was sewn into this seam here, which limited the amount of volume that can be added at the bottom. So bottles and things didn't really fit very well. In the pattern pieces, that's why this stretch piece curves underneath the side panel pocket, is that allows this stretch material to give a little bit, adding more volume. And you'll be stitching the stretch material down to inside the seam between the side and the side bottom. We'll be using 2 pieces of 3-inch elastic. This is 1/2 inch wide, 3 inches long. That'll go inside the hem that's sewed along the top edge. When you have the pocket and the stretch connected together and the elastic inserted, I had pinned it all together and then ran a basting stitch around the edge within the seam allowance, connecting the two together so they'll now act as one. A quick tip, use tissue paper or printer paper to reduce the friction between your presser foot and the stretch fabric. Jumping into step 4, we'll be attaching side bottom to the pre-assembled side. Okay, to finish step 4, what I want you to do is pin it all together. Pin your sides to your front. When you open this up, double check that your front lower and your side bottoms, the seams, align fairly well. So as I'm coming down to this bottom seam, I'm just double checking my seam allowances lay the same direction and that the material is all nice and smooth as I go over this. I want to make sure I don't catch any wrinkles here in this corner and have to back this out later. I backstitch a little bit just to secure it. Then I'm going to come right down and I'll stop short of this bottom clip. And there, the side trim is now attached to the side with a nice seam where the side bottom and the front lower meet. In the next video, I'm going to jump to doing shoulder straps, so stay tuned for that one. If you like this video, hit the like button and let me know. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.